Good morning, everybody. My name is Caitlin Kelly. I'm the Deputy Director for the Renewable and Alternative Energy Development Division at DOER. Thank you for joining us this morning as we go over the compliance filing process for the 2019 compliance year for the Massachusetts RPS, APS, CES, and CPS. I'm joined today by John Wassam, our RPS and APS Program Manager at DOER, and also by Jordan Garfinkel, an environmental analyst from DEP, and Sue Ann Richardson, another environmental analyst from DEP. So to start the presentation, I'll turn it over to John Wassam, our RPS and APS Program Manager, who will start going through the filing process with you.
Good morning. We'll just jump into this. We'll do some slides first about changes and requirements, and then guys will bring up the 2019 filing workbook and just go through that. It hasn't changed much, but we'll just go through where people have to enter information. So in the 2019 compliance filing process, any bank certificates that suppliers had available to them, we provided in April. The load obligation for 2019 was provided in May. Workbook will be posted hopefully today or at the possibly on Monday. We just have to review it, final shape, just take one more look at it. At the end of the 2019 trading year is midnight on June 15th. We are requesting this year that if you have an alternative compliance payment, that those be made to the Mass CEC by Friday, June 26th, so that they can turn around and provide a receipt to you, which will be submitted with your email application. It's a slightly different process as it was last year for any ACPs standard. The Mass DEP will send an invoice to the supplier once the ACP is known, and then payment is due within 30 days. But that's a separate process. Do not send payment for any CES ACP to the, because these are different programs. There have been questions about whether the filing date was going to be changed, but because of COVID-19, but we found no reason to move it. We're able to do everything. So the filing date remains on July 1st. Filers must, as in the past, must provide both electronic and hard copies. We'll discuss the hard copies a little later. There's not as much urgency on those because we are working from home at the moment. And that's the email address to send the emailed filing to doer.rps@mass.gov. Some changes this year. The first is you will be able to bank for the clean energy standard. The banking allowance is 30% of the CES obligation. So the obligation is 4%, assuming no exemptions, is 4% of the load obligation. That's what the banking would be based upon. There's a major caveat, however, that if you bank certificates in 2019, they will not be able to be used for compliance until 2021. So there's a hold on them for 2 years. And again, to reiterate, if you bank anything for any class in the filing workbook, those bank certificates apply only to the same class for which they were banked. So even if you bank this year certificates for the clean energy standard, you would not be allowed to use those bank certificates for RPS class 1, for example, and vice versa. Any bank certificates for class 1 can only be used for the RPS class 1. They could not be used to meet the clean energy standard. This technically is the first year of compliance for the Clean Peak standard, known as CPS. However, we did file emergency regulations, which are in effect for the minimum standard, but the minimum standard is 0%. So no worksheet on the filing workbook will be shown, and nothing needs to be reported at this time. These are the banked requirements that again, anything banked in 2019 could be used for compliance in 2020 or 2021, with the exception of the CES bank certificates. None of the banks have changed from last year. These are the same percentages. And just as a footnote, the CPS bank will be 30% of the obligation, but that will not appear until next year. Settled certificates. You should settle all of your certificates in a Massachusetts sub-account by June 15th. This is important. This includes any SREC or SREC2s that were reminted and that you intend to use this year for compliance. Should also be settled in your Massachusetts sub-account. And if you bought excess certificates that you intend to bank with DOER, again, there's a major difference between what's banked at GIS and banked by DOER. Those are two separate concepts entirely. But if you bank something that you intend to use for future years compliance, you should settle those 2019 certificates in your Massachusetts sub-account. One other and a footnote, I don't know if people are aware, and this would apply to next year, but in the Clean Peak standard, the NEPO GIS regulations are going to require you to settle those certificates in a separate Massachusetts sub-account. And I believe NEPO GIS was going to make it so that the only certificates you could settle in that sub-account are CPS certificates, or we call them CPECs. So there would be no chance of mistakes or errors occurring in that. But that doesn't apply to this year. And again, it may apply for next year. And again, a caution about unsettled or errant certificates just cause extra work for us. One thing I did not show on the slides, and I should have, is that again, you will have to provide your settled certificates to DOER along with your workbook filing. Those are always sent in CSV format. And just a reminder that NEPO GIS does allow you to represent a whole calendar year when you create those reports. So you can click on, you want to go from first quarter 2019 to the fourth quarter of 2019. it will produce a report for the entire year, and you should send that report unmodified, unaltered, in CSV format, along with your workbook filing to DOER at the same email address. Nothing's really changed for the solar practices. Any reminted SRECs, maybe for 2017 reminted SRECs must be used for 2019 compliance. Same with any 2017 remitted SREC 2s must be used in this compliance year or they will expire. Any 2018 remitted SRECs and SREC 2s can be used for this compliance year or in 2020. And again, a caution, all reminted SRECs or auction SRECs and SREC 2s for compliance use in 2020 should remain in your main GIS account or this is your PIS banked account, not in your Massachusetts sub-account. As if they appear in the Massachusetts sub-account, they will be considered used for this compliance year. And again, another word of caution, you do not list the reminted SRECs or SREC in the bank columns in the filing workbook. They would be considered the settled SRECs that you list, and not as banked SREC. So that's just another word of caution, and we'll point to that when we get to the filing workbook. Again, there's a bifurcation for the solar carve-out, and there's a place in the workbook to show and megawatt hours of any exemptions you have in solar carve-out or any contracts that were executed or extended before 6/28/13 has a different minimum standard. And then all contracts executed after the date have a different standard. So the number of exempt back from 2013 certainly should be diminishing at this point. The same goes for solar carve-out 2, which has 2 levels of exemptions. So the first is before April 25th, 2014. That has a minimum standard of 0%. If you had a contract executed after April 25th, but before May 8th of 2016, those contracts would have a minimum standard of 2.3196. And then for all remaining contracts, the standard this year is 3.9141. And again, the filing workbook asks for the number and megawatt hours of each of these exemptions that you report. One note, we did, and we'll show this in the filing workbook, we did eliminate the monthly allocation of these exempt contracts. It just was not being used. So you only have to enter the total annual exemptions of contracts and megawatt hours this year. And we'll see that in the filing workbook. Once again, we'll have SREC and SREC 2 auctions will be held before the end of July. Once again, we do not expect to have significant auction volume for this year. Any deposits of certificates that you want to go to the auction must be made by June 15th. I forgot, we don't have a link here on our website to where that's made, but you can easily find it on the website. There's a whole page on explaining the auction process and forms you need to apply for the auction. If you have questions about the auctions, the best person to contact is Caitlin Kelly, who's also on this call. And just highlight what the advantages of the auction. This is describing the ACP payments. Nothing's changed from last year. And again, we hope that they're made by Friday, June 26th, so you can get a receipt. We will be sending out the wire instructions once again by encrypted email. That hopefully that can be sent out early next week. The notification tab is the last tab. You should email or get to Mass CEC a copy of that tab along with the payment, or usually it's done by wire. And Mass CEC signs at the bottom of that tab and returns it to you once they have received payment. Reminder that the receipt should be included, must be included as part of your emailed filing. And just if you have not received the ACP receipt, you should not delay submission of the filing. Please have it in by July 1st. And again, a note that ACP payments for CES follow a different process. Jordan, do you want to?
Yeah, thanks.
Clean Energy Standard. This is Jordan Garfinkel of Mass DEP.
Thanks, John. Good morning, everybody. And let me also just note that we are going to be trying to hold questions till the end, but the way to raise questions is going to be through the chat function in the sidebar on the webinar screen. So you can type them in at any point, and as they come up, and then we'll go through at the end of the webinar. We'll go through the questions one at a time, and so you can enter them now, or you can enter them later, and we'll address them at the end. So as John mentioned, the CES standard in 2019 is 18%, and the RPS standard was 14%. So what we refer to as the incremental CES obligation is 4% in 2019. As last year, as every year, the RPS Class 1 obligation counts towards CES, and as was the case last year, every CEC, every KEC or Clean Energy Certificate is also an RPS Class 1 eligible REC. The exemptions that we put forth in the final regulation, the grandfathering of certain megawatt hours sold under existing contracts, stands again in 2019, and that requires submission of the workbook and the forms that are on the DEP website. The updated 2019 exemption forms are live on the DEP website for the Clean Energy Standard, and those links are, I believe, in this presentation, and also an email sent by DEP and on the DEP website homepage. The exemptions process also required that suppliers submitted a projected amount for 2018 and for 2019 if they expected to request exemptions by the end of 2017, and the vast majority of suppliers who applied for exemptions in 2018 did submit that form, so we don't anticipate we don't anticipate that this is a surprise or that there will be any real issue complying with this. 2019 is the last year of exemptions, so beginning in 2020, there's going to be no more eligibility for exemption of megawatt hours sold under any type of contract. As John mentioned, the ACP funds paid to DEP go through a different process from how they're paid to Mass CEC for RPS. And this was the case last year as well. The workbook will auto-calculate if there's a shortfall. It'll auto-calculate the amount of megawatt hour, the number of megawatt hours, and the amount of ACP funds owed to DEP. Upon receiving the compliance workbook, DEP will invoice the suppliers for that amount, and payments are due within 30 days of receiving that invoice. And that the invoicing process goes through a separate channel, and that's why this process is distinct from DOERs, and the instructions are in the workbook and in some of the accompanying documentation. Next, Sue Ann Richardson's gonna just walk through the greenhouse gas reporting piece.
Hi, thanks. All right, so utilities and competitive suppliers are required to submit their specific megawatt hours and greenhouse gas emissions. You will do this with the greenhouse gas tab of the workbook by entering data from your GIS settled certificate report. The greenhouse gas tab will calculate the greenhouse gas emissions specific to your company, which you will then enter into the AQ32 spreadsheet that you will submit to DEP next September as part of your annual greenhouse gas emissions report. And that's about all I have.
Okay. Other issues that have come up partly because of the COVID-19 pandemic and stay-at-home issues, etc. At this point in time, DOER is not waiving the notary signature requirement on the authorization form on the workbook. A lot of states have adopted virtual notification. A lot of states are opening up, so maybe it's less of an issue. But also a lot of states have adopted virtual notary witnessing. All I can speak to is in Massachusetts, where the party and the notary have to both be in the state. The notary can witness a virtual signing of the document, but in Massachusetts, it also requires an affidavit by the notary that he or she witnessed the signing of the document. So we would require that, if that's the principle in your state, we would require that affidavit as acceptance that it was signed by a notary as well. So they wouldn't have to physically sign the authorization form, but you must provide proof that a notary witnessed the signing. Also, DOER is still working from home. There's not as much pressure to send the hard copies into DOER. We still do expect them because it includes the signed paperwork. But no one's at the DOER location on a regular basis to receive express mail or sign for mail. And mail is only periodically being picked up at the physical location. So just use your judgment in sending in those hard copies. But we're more flexible this year on receiving those hard copies. And finally, this is a list of contacts of us who are on this webinar. So that covers the basic issues. Hopefully this will work. Can you see my screen at the moment? with the workbook?
Yeah, looks good, John.
Okay. Nothing's changed on this page. This is the first page where you enter contact information and, importantly, to the authorized representative for your company to sign the certification and the authorization. Once you fill in your name here, this carries forward to the other spreadsheets. In the preliminary page, nothing's changed here. You would put your load obligation here, which should match what DOER sent to you. If it's broken out into sub-accounts, you would list those sub-accounts, the name in column B, and then the associated obligation in column C. But the total amount should equal what was sent to you for your load obligation. Again, down here is a representation of how you're disposing of your SRECs. This column should be all the SRECs that you settled into GIS, and the same applies to SREC 2 below. Any SRECs that were deposited, it's kind of self-explanatory from here. If you have auction accounts, just how you disposed of your auctions. If any SRECs were applied to voluntary green sales. And then how many were applied to your solar carve-out compliance, and then if you happen to use any solar carve-out for class 1, because they are class 1 certificates, you would list it down here. But this is the same as last year. Nothing's changed in that regard. In the exempt tab, you'll note there's no more requirement to do the monthly allocation, as we indicated before. There is, here you should list the number of contracts, and in column F, you should list the megawatt hours of exemption. And then the blue cell automatically calculate. This is the green cell is automatically carried forward from your load obligation, and the blue cell automatically subtracts the exempt contracts and delivers the net obligation load obligation you would have. These column, just to mention, these small columns of B, C, D, E, and F, they're used in assimilating the data. They don't correspond to the actual Excel column, but they're for our purposes, as well as the rows over here, these small cells. They're just used for DOER assimilation of data purposes. And below, we ask for the number and megawatt hours of exempt contracts that you project in the future. Similarly, we go through this again for SREC 2. The column E would be the first level of exemption, and column G would be the second level of exemption that we showed in the slide deck for the trifurcation of the SREC 2 program. And then again, going down below, we ask for the number and megawatt hours of any projections you have going forward, which we use for planning purposes. Tab 4 is where you would enter any errant certificates. This has become less of an issue over time, but if you happen to have any, this is where they would be reported. The table here looks familiar, just some of the numbers have changed, but again, going through, I can just show, if I go back to 14A, I can just show, suppose somebody had 100,000 sales in Massachusetts. You can come over here. The load obligation is carried forward, and the calculated obligation is 8,339 because we have not entered any settled certificates in column D. Everything would be owed ACP. And again, on the banking of 20, so if we entered 10,000, here you can see that the ACP goes away because my 10,000 covers the 8,339 of the obligation. And then I go to the bottom of the bank. I have 1,661 excess. Limit was 2,501. I haven't exceeded that limit, therefore I'm banking 1,661. If I move that up to 11,000, for some reason I settled that many certificates, you see that the bank is 2,661 is greater than the limit, and so you're only allowed to bank 2,501. Similarly, and again, RPS class 1, this obligation is not, it is 14%, but in the cell, we do subtract the obligation for solar carve-out and solar carve-out 2. So it's because they're carve-out, it's the net obligation after we subtract those obligations. So here we can see again, I'm not going to fill anything in. These all work the same. We reported no exemptions, so the no exemption load is a calculation that would have appeared in this column. The obligation is 1746 because we haven't filed any certificates. The ACP requirement would have been 1746. So again, these all go through the same iteration. Nothing has changed in any of these. The CES, we do allow banking. So this year, the cap on their banking would be 160 based on 30% of the obligation. It's the incremental obligation of 4,000. Then we get this has been slightly revised for the GHG tab. And maybe Sue Ann wants to
Sure.
step and discuss anything about this.
Sure. I have a couple of suggestions. You're going to fill this out from data that you have on your NEPOOL GIS settled certificate report. When you do that, I would suggest that you use the filter function in Excel and filter out everything that does not settle into a Massachusetts subaccount to start. And then the second step might be to filter out everything that is APS qualified, because APS is generally not electricity generating and it shouldn't go into this tab. After you know you're working with Massachusetts certificates and not APS certificates, you can then count up your class 2 waste to energy certificates and any of your class 2 and class 1 by fuel types and put the numbers into the blue boxes you see on the screen. Some confusion from last year, SRECs are class 1 recs. All SRECs are class 1 recs, so you can just count them up from the class 1 column for solar. Solar thermal should not go into this spreadsheet. They're generating heat, they're not making electricity. And I think that's all. I think there'll be an opportunity for questions later if anyone has them. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. The green tab is the same when you've identified certificates for green, you would enter here, and they do get a credit in Reggie for future years. So please identify them here as in years past. This is the calculation. It's going to be a little off but you see, we had 0. Remember in RPS class 1, we had 0. Oops, that's not carrying forward. This is why so we'll have to fix that. Some things did not carry forward. I think the obligation was 4,000. So. It becomes quite pricey if you did not buy any ACP or did not have any certificates settled for these different components, but everything's carried forward here. Shows the ACP rate and the 2000, and then CES is listed differently, and this is the portion on line 32 is what DEP would invoice you for separately. You would pay, in this example, the 2.2 million to the Mass CEC, and DEP would invoice you for the 211,000. Let me go back here. This is the certification page, which the authorized representative signs. There are 2 places. One's for the Mass Clean, the bottom one's for the Mass Clean Energy, and the top one is for DOER. This is our certification. And then below, as I said, was the DEP certification. The authorization is where the notary is required. So the authorized representative signs this. Down below, you can see that a notary is required. That requirement has not been waived at this time by DOER. I do not anticipate that it will be waived by DOER. But we'll, you know, if there's a problem, extenuating circumstance, please notify us, and we will get back to you on how to resolve that issue. This box is frequently misconstrued. The basis of the statement of authorization is just describing your authority to be the authorized representative. That is, by virtue of your title, you have right to sign for the company, a description of your responsibility, etc. That's what we're asking for in that box. By what authority is the authorized representative authorized to sign the form? Tab N again is this is just relates to the RPS APS because the CES is under a different program. This is the tab you would email. It shows all the ACP that you would owe for RPS APS. You would email this to Mass CEC. Then Mass CEC signs it down here and returns it to you, and you should send a PDF copy or a scanned copy, whatever, of this receipt, along with your filing. This is what we're requesting the payments be made by Friday, May 26th, so that you have time to get the receipt back and gather all materials and meet the July 1st deadline. The final tab is just contacts again. I should note, we do have the ability to pick up voicemail, but at this point in time, it's better to email us. And then the final version, we may drop these phone numbers if decided. It's just better to use email at this time, as all of us are working from home, and we will be for the foreseeable future. So I don't expect that to change, even by July 1st. So with that, are there any questions?
John, we have some questions in the question bar. I don't know if you can see them.
Here.
Do you want me to read some of them to you?
All right. What is an errant certificate? Am I at the top? Maybe not.
Yep.
An errant certificate is one that hasn't been settled. Suppose, for whatever reason you own the certificates, it did not get settled to your sub account. You would have to reach out to DOER on a case-by-case basis. But those generally are any certificates that were not settled into the mass sub account, but you want to use for compliance. Settled certificates is what is settled into the Massachusetts sub account. I don't know if I have the technical NEPL GIS term. Maybe somebody else knows, but it's when you've retired your certificates to the Massachusetts sub account. Those are settled certificates for Massachusetts purposes. If you have, we're always available. Just reach out to me. If this is the first year and it's confusing of what to do, just reach out to me at doer.rps@mass.com, and I'd be happy to go over any questions you have or help, even fill out the form as we go through it. CES, it's, could you please, the question is, could you please clarify for CES that the certificates need to be generated in mass or simply eligible for mass compliance? The answer is any class 1 certificate that's eligible for mass compliance meets the qualification for the clean energy standard. There is no, you do not have to have a Massachusetts generated certificate to qualify for CES. Any class 1, any Massachusetts class 1 qualified certificate is sufficient. I'm not sure on title and job description. The next question seems to be, how do you define the mass subaccount? That's created by you in the NEPOOL GIS. You would typically have a subaccount for any state in NEPOOL that you were doing business for. For example, you would have a Connecticut subaccount. You would have a Mass subaccount. You might have a Maine subaccount. You might have a New Hampshire subaccount. Any certificates used for Massachusetts compliance has to be Massachusetts qualified certificates that you settle into your Massachusetts subaccount. So I would settle, say, 1,000 class 1 into there. I would settle 100 class 2 if that's all I had, class 2 renewable. I settle my Massachusetts qualified waste to energy in the I combine them all into the subaccount. Generally, you only need one mass subaccount to handle all the certificates that you retire to that. And just again, a note, next year, you will have to put any CPEC, Clean Peak Energy Credit, into a separate subaccount, but only CPECs would be allowed into that subaccount. I mean, that again, that goes back to the errant question. You had something in a different subaccount. Is that the bottom of the?
Yeah, that's all we had for questions. Somebody had asked earlier and I answered privately. This is being recorded. So we will, once the recording has processed, we will be posting it on our YouTube channel and then a link on our webinar page. And John may also post it, a link from our RPS section. So it will be available as well as the handouts and slides. So I hope that answers that for everybody.
Yeah, this is all, will all be available on the DOER website. If you go to compliance information for suppliers, and you weed your way through there, it will be available. You could currently see all the 2018, as I said, hopefully we'll get the 2019 workbook posted this afternoon. And with the webinar slides, and that's where the recording will be placed as well. If there are no further questions, I'd like to thank all the panelists. And please feel free to reach out to any of us with your specific questions regarding the filing. Deadline, again, will be July 1st, 2020 for the 2019 compliance year. Anybody else have anything else to add? Okay. I think that does it. Thank you for your participation and have a good rest of the afternoon.
Thank you.